Well, welcome everyone. Just to confirm that you're in the right place, this is the panel on public-private partnerships, sparking startup success and economic growth. My name is Eric Pages. I'm president of EntreWorks Consulting. We're an economic development consulting firm based in Arlington, Virginia, outside of DC. But my real claim is that I'm on the board of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, and we're here with a tremendous panel. I'm sure, like all of you, you've really been wowed by Indianapolis and by the hospitality of our Hoosier colleagues here in Indiana. And there's a reason why we're holding the GEC here in Indiana. First time in more than a decade, or really 15 years since this event has been held in the United States. The reason it's been held here in Indiana is because Indiana has done such an outstanding job of building strong regional and statewide ecosystems and industry-focused ecosystems across the state. And the real secret sauce for the state of Indiana is its effective use of public-private partnerships. And we have got three pillars of the ecosystem building efforts here, all coming to us from really differing perspectives, differing kind of visions of how you do ecosystem building, how you do public-private partnerships. So first, immediately on my left is David Watkins. David Watkins is Vice President for the International Indiana Economic Development Corporation, IEDC. And David basically oversees everything related to entrepreneurship and small business. So in addition to the ecosystem building work, his office and his division runs the Small Business Development Center network for the state of Indiana. And so he's coming at this from a public sector role. Following David, we'll hear from Ting Guti. Ting is the president of TechPoint. TechPoint is a very interesting organization. It's an IT and startup focused network, and it is part of a larger organization called the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, or CICP. And CICP has a number of different units. It's got a unit on, we have some colleagues from Agrinovus here, which is focused on ag tech and ag biosciences. And Ting's operation within CICP focuses on the information technology space. She's been an investor in addition to this role, so she brings a perspective from nonprofit industry and also trade associations. And then last but not least, we'll hear from Andrew Kosak. Andrew is Vice President at Applied Research Institute, ARI, which is, I guess you'd call you a nonprofit. Is that your legal status? But really a kind of a research organization, and under their umbrella, they've got a number of very interesting projects, do a lot of work in microelectronics. So they're funded by the Department of Defense for an organization called the Microelectronics Commons. They also run what's called a tech hub here in the United States called Heartland Bioworks. So that's an organization focused on life sciences, workforce training, and life sciences kind of cluster development, if we want to use those terms. So we have got a great panel here, and what I'm going to do is have each of them tell you a little bit about themselves and their organizations. We've got a few questions, but hopefully we'd like to get as much of an interactive session as we can have and get questions and feedback from all of you. So let me turn it over to David, and then we'll hear from Ting, and then we'll hear from Andrew. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. So. First off, welcome to Indiana. We're excited to have you here for the Global Entrepreneurship Congress. This has been a great partnership with Jen over the course of the last almost 3 years as we've prepared for this event and welcoming all of you here. And I think the entire Indiana ecosystem was part of the why for why have the Global Entrepreneurship Congress in Indiana. And as Eric mentioned, a big part of that is how we do business. Whether it's a formal public-private partnership or whether it's an informal one, I think if we think about the public, private, and partnership, that is how we approach a lot of entrepreneurial economic development. You cannot have a government sitting in an office trying to think about what we can do for entrepreneurs or for small businesses without the actual private sector input on what are the needs of the ecosystem, what are the needs of the universities, of the startups, of the Main Street small businesses. We actually try to test and iterate and launch something, see if it works. If it doesn't work, okay, let's try something else to meet the needs of the private sector, and that generates this long-term partnership. In addition to that being how we operate, we also work with some of the amazing folks represented on this stage to implement the right kinds of programs and support structures for Indiana startups and small businesses. Knowing when not to act as a government is often just as important as knowing when to act, and even knowing when to work with a partner who can bring different stakeholders to the table in a way that maybe the state of Indiana can't. Maybe I can't in my role, or I'm not the most effective at bringing stakeholders to a joint table to tackle some of the most pressing needs in entrepreneurship and small business. So I'm excited to be here and have this conversation. As Eric mentioned, we have a very unique structure whereby my team, which is a team of 15 at the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, and then all of our SBDC offices throughout the entire state are all integrated as one team, from venture capital to small business and Main Street, manufacturing, small business manufacturing, tech commercialization. We have that all under one roof, which allows us, I believe, to really offer a streamlined ability to serve our constituents, who in this case are the 570,000 small businesses who call Indiana home. So happy to be here. Thanks, Eric.
Welcome, everybody, to Indianapolis. My name is Teen Goody. I'm President and CEO of TechPoint. As Eric pointed out, we're part of the sector development strategy for tech. These days, I probably like to call it more AI-enabled versus information technology. And we're part of the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. Around Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, the secret sauce we have, like what you mentioned earlier, David, around industry buy-in, light by industry, so we can solve actual pain points within the community. That's pretty much the build-out strategy the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership have developed over the last 25 years. It's a strong network of corporate CEOs, startup founders, university presidents, and last but not least, government and philanthropic leaders. We are that long-term relationships that build up upon a trust and build upon our collective vision and track record in terms of driving collective economic empowerment and growth. Take TechPoint for an example, sort of one of the four pillars, they're cutting across all sectors. I know some of the sector leaders are sitting here today as well, or innovation entrepreneurship, workforce development. Of course, you can't drive economic development without the talent piece. The network building, I'll elaborate a little more on that, how we do that. And last but not least, the thought leadership. So really take a very data-driven advocacy, built upon approach, intentionally align what state is driving from a high-level vision standpoint. And we tend to be the one who's in the ground execute, right? Before joining TechPoint, I spent about 16 years mostly in a startup land, writing a lot of checks. Actually, it was a government-led program, learned a lot. But I also learned there's some unique things about industry-led, and be clear about who are your primary customers. I remember early days, we have this even fun debate. Is a funder our primary customers, or startups our primary customers? Fast forward today, the vision is clear. For everything to succeed in this room, the founders and startups ought to be the primary stakeholders. And that's how we have, in the last couple of years, putting the founder in the center of our networks, very clearly driven by market adoption. And the proof is in the pudding. We didn't come into the tech startup land with a grand vision or plan, but we know what the pain points are because we work with thousands of them. And fast forward today, we stood up the Founders Network that was almost 200 strong now. We stood up the AI Innovation Network because AI adoption needs to be really happening everywhere, regardless who you are. And that's one of our fastest growing networks on top of all the corporate networks and philanthropic networks that we've been operating. So the network strategy is working, and that's really conducive for us to partner with education sectors and other nonprofit government to really drive more bigger impact we're looking for. Andrew?
So before Andrew comes in, if you could tell the audience about your website, your web address, because there's some tremendous reports and research documents on the TechPoint website and the CICP website. CICP
Oh yeah, thank you very much. CICP website, cicpindiana.com. Ours is techpoint.org. There's a lot of our sister initiatives about Crossroads, Agronovus, and Connexus, and these are our name plus Indiana.com website.
Yeah, great workforce study that was done quite recently, yes.
Yeah.
Andrew, sorry.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Indiana, home of the Pacers. Sorry if you're from Oklahoma, but thank you. We got a couple fans. Pacers in 6, we'll call it now. I may be wrong, but keep hope alive. But no, great to see you all. So Eric gave a great overview of my organization and some of the work that we do. We are essentially a public-private partnership that also helps implement some federally funded public-private partnerships, also known as tech hubs. And tech hubs is one of these phrases that you're probably hearing from a lot of different sectors. It gets confusing because there are a number of tech hubs across the federal government through different agencies. We have 3 of them that we're involved in, 2 that we directly oversee. One is Heartland Bioworks, which is a biomanufacturing-focused tech hub through the Department of Commerce and Economic Development Administration. And then we have a microelectronics hub called Silicon Crossroads. That's a DoD-funded program. And then the last one is the Hydrogen Hub, kind of centered around Northwest Indiana and throughout the Midwest. That's through the Department of Energy. So those programs are still active. Things are changing with even legislation that's making its way through Congress now, but we're still in the implementation phases. And each of those requires cross-sector collaboration. So our board is made up of university presidents. The governor has a seat on our board through some of David's colleagues at the IEDC. And then industry and other nonprofit leaders are represented on there too. So it's supposed to be this collision of government, private industry, and academia to further these critical technologies in the state of Indiana, certainly, but also for the benefit of the nation.
Great. So as you can see, we've got a tremendous panel here with deep experience in building and executing on partnerships. So I'm going to ask them a couple questions so they can share some more of their insights. But I'd ask you also to be thinking about some questions because we will go to the audience in a few minutes. But just to get started, in the United States, and I'm sure this is true in most countries, particularly anything related to ecosystem building, any sort of big economic development initiative, you can't do it alone. The state can't do it alone. The private sector can't do it alone. The nonprofit, the philanthropic sector can't do it alone. So it's always about going out and searching for partners. And one of my sort of learnings over the years is that these partnerships, they're really like dating, right? In the sense that you're going to decide you want to go on a date with this person. You're going to go on the first date. You're going to decide if you're copacetic, and then you're going to decide, are we going to go get married or are we going to break up and divorce or whatever that is. So I'd want to ask our group to really think about what do you look for in partnerships at these various phases. When you first decide on, do we want to work with this organization? Then when you're in the actual partnership, how do you know it's working or how do you know it's not working and you need to be thinking about bailing? And then last but not least, we don't really talk about this enough in the industry, is what about the dissolution of these partnerships? How do we do this in a way that's not bad blood? Now, we know the number one criteria in a partner is lots of money, but so we'll take that one off the table. I say that in jest, but still, we know the reality. But anyway, and you guys can go in whatever order you want, and you can talk about all 3 stages, or you can talk about 1 stage, whatever you feel like doing.
Well, maybe I'll take a first stab. So sometimes, this is a good question, because sometimes we do go into, as the government, thinking about the public sector, if there's something we want to accomplish, we do always try to go with an end in mind. Now that end might not be a dissolution, but it could be the end of public funding even, right? Like, so it could, sometimes, we contemplate, okay, hey, if we're going to go into a partnership and we're going to try to accomplish this thing, then there's a timeline for that maturing and getting to a point where either it can sustain itself or the industry is bought in enough That's one of those key indicators for us. We're not trying to lead industry. We're trying to de-risk and catalyze in particular areas that maybe we need a bunch of industry partners at the table that wouldn't otherwise do that on their own. It's one of the things that we look out for most, actually, is when we're looking at some type of public-private partnership proposal. We don't want to be the only people at the table, right? That's a red flag right off the bat. We need to see the industry buy-in. So I'll give you a great example. Just across this Gen Village is a Indy car, and if you'll notice, there's no seat where a human could sit in that Indy car. It's because it's an autonomous Indy car. That was a pitch for a public-private partnership to the state. It said, hey, Indiana's known for motorsports. Indiana's known for automotive manufacturing. Autonomous technology is coming. We already hear about what they're happening out in the coast. You got Waymo and you got Uber, and they're trying to put these, self-driving passenger vehicles. How is that going to disrupt the industry in Indiana? What if we issued a grand challenge, like the DARPA challenge of old, and said, for $1 million, PhD teams from universities around the world can come to Indianapolis, and they can run their AI race car on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. When that pitch comes in, you're kind of like, what? Is there, what are we talking about here? And then you start to talk to the corporations that are interested in this AI technology. They're like, well, we've never tested the technology at 100 plus miles an hour. They got the Toyota SUV driving around, San Francisco is not going 100, let alone going, even 60 and 70 miles per hour. And how can we integrate the wideband communication needed for split-second decision making across LiDAR and GPS? Again, all on a race car, and there's nobody sitting in it to correct it if it starts to go the wrong way, right? So as we started to talk to industry, and we started to then talk to higher education, this then became kind of a talent opportunity as well, because we had the top mobility and automotive PhD students from Germany, from Italy, from South Korea, from the United States, all wanting to come here and work on an Indy car to make it actually run autonomously. And that became a tremendous opportunity for engaging our higher ed partners who were interested in this. And the most fascinating thing to me is when you talk to some of the students involved in that project, they were not fans of racing. I kind of expected, oh, you must be a fan of racing, you're working on an autonomous race car. No, they were electrical engineers, they were engineering, computer programming, they were interested in robotics and things like that, and AI development, and motorsport became the vehicle for them to get exposed to this entire industry that we happen to have a very strong motorsport industry here in Indiana as well. So you start with an end in mind. You examine what, from the public sector point of view, what industry is saying. You listen to what industry is saying. You listen to what you're hearing from your higher ed partners. And today, the Indy Autonomous Challenge operates on its own without funding from the state of Indiana. About 4 years down the line. So we set out a goal and said, hey, we want to get this up and running. We want to see this innovation happen in Indiana. We want to be at the forefront of that innovation. But then we want to see it grow beyond the public good that we identified on the front end. And they've obviously been highly successful at doing that. So that's certainly from our point of view.
Yeah, that's a great project. Tink.
Eric, I think what you just heard is really part of the main reason why public-private partnerships been working so well in our great state of Indiana. It's because leaders at state levels really understood what makes market work and understood their specific role within making that market movement work, understood how important it is to get industry buy-in, even knowing the startup, particularly thinking about startup entrepreneurship. It's a long-term endeavor, right? Many of us in this room are fan of Brad Feld, which I had the pleasure of getting his signed book and listening to his pitch last night. And he reminded us yet again, anytime we talk about entrepreneurship, startup community, is always at least 2 decades ahead of us. So these are long-term relationships, long-term partnerships, takes consistency, takes execution, and takes self-sustainability in mind, and takes partners like the state to know to drive that kind of vision, but also recognizing what actually make the partners want to do the buy-in. You talk about, we cannot talk about anything without talking about money. I think economic incentives, aligning economic incentives on the front end during the execution is important. And I'm grateful that at least in our great state of Indiana, our people at the leadership positions, even the state level, recognizing that using money, economic incentive as a tool to incentivize the right behavior. And the North Star for all of us is really market's going to dictate at the end of the day whether something works or not. Give you a case in point, and I'll hand it off to Andrew. You know, our Indiana Founders Network was very simple. The genesis, we did not, I mean, over time, David and others knows this, even in my prior role with leading some of the government funded programs, it's really hard. And we thought it was easy, and wouldn't it be obvious? Everybody just get together, founders all thought they were all lonely. Turns out, if you're government-led programs, you had a really hard time getting market buy-in. Not for anything nefarious, just credibility is a thing, right? So coming out of pandemic, and I put my government-led program hat off and putting on a different hat, and my team members and we all coming out of the pandemic, we're talking to different founders. Turns out, not surprisingly, everybody was having a hard time. Everybody thought they were alone. Guess what? We did not ask for money. We didn't write a business plan. We take entrepreneurial approach, eat our own dog food in a way. We take the entrepreneurial approach to building the startup founder community, just say, hey, let's launch this thing. We know who the right people are, at least the core group. Get them together, and next thing you know, fast forward only a year in, we have 150 founders. We'll do 2 chapters in Fort Wayne and Bloomington. We're getting to expand more because the market demand is there. Now, market demand is how do you keep this thing going and expand and reach better scale? That's what we're thinking about funding strategy. So it's very intentional. It was not top down, it was more bottoms up. But fortunately, we have partners like, David, recognizing, okay, we got to invest where market tell us you got traction.
That's great.
So to answer your question, when do we know the partnership is not working? Market it would dictate.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And going back to David's initial comment to just the importance of starting with the end in mind and working backwards and setting clear metrics along the way, and then, holding each other accountable as you team on these opportunities. So the Heartland Bioworks example is an interesting one because from the outset of that, it was a competitive process. There were 400 regions around the country, and the competition was set up by the federal government very open. They basically said, we have a pot of $500 million, and we want you out in the field to form regions, coalitions, and then propose how you would spend up to $75 million in grant funding to take your region from the edge of glory into glory. They use that phrase, edge of glory, a lot. So they were looking for regions and industries, critical technology areas that were just on the precipice of really taking off. And they're interested in economic, impact and job creation is the primary driver of that program. So we as a state had a lot of decisions to make around, who would apply for this, how, what would the proposal be for how to spend up to $75 million? What would the critical technology area be? Because you could take your list, your pick from a list that the federal government had published, all sort of national security aligned. So the IEDC did a lot of work around, hey, what is the best chance for the state to be successful in this? But we knew from the outset we needed to be unified. And my boss, David Roberts, has a saying that he likes to use, which is, Indiana is big enough to compete against anybody, but not if we're competing against ourselves. And so the unification around a proposal, which ultimately landed at biomanufacturing, because it kind of is the convergence of a couple of our strengths as a state. One's in advanced manufacturing, and then in the life sciences and agriculture area, kind of brought a lot of those, core competencies together, if you will. And we ultimately went with that best foot forward because we thought it would give us the best shot to win, and ultimately we were successful with that. But along the way, there was a lot of debate about that because there are some nascent industries, like we got some hypersonics work, we've got battery storage is a big industry in this state, a lot of software development work, as Ting knows. So there's all kinds of different ways that we could go with that application. And sometimes that's the most challenging thing, is figure out where are we going to focus, because there's so many different ways we could approach this, so many ways to spend $75 million, and everybody had a different idea on how to do that. But ultimately we had to pick, and then I just give this ecosystem so much credit for coming together and just finding a way to lift all boats rather than being sort of concerned about each of our own boats. And collectively, it's been great so far, but we're tracking to those milestones too. We've got milestones that everybody has to hit, and we're holding each other accountable along the way.
Great, thank you, Andrew. So we'll flip with the order, and we'll start with Andrew on this one. This is going to be the last question from the stage, so I don't know if we're going to get a mic around or whatever. We'll open it up to questions after this one. But for the last 4 or 5 years, we've really had a flourishing of public-private partnerships in economic development here in the United States. And the reason for that is because we've had huge stimulus because of the pandemic and the post-pandemic economic recovery. Those resources and kind of that pot at the end of the rainbow is gone nowadays. And that was really motivating a lot of communities around the United States to really actively embrace public-private partnerships, because it was a clear win in terms of resources at the end of the process. That may not be the case so much anymore, or at least a clear thing to go for in the form of a federal grant. How is that going to change how you work public-private partnerships going forward for each of you? But we'll start with you, Andrew.
Yeah, so it's interesting. 2019 federal spending in the aggregate was $4.5 trillion, and then 2020. It reached about $2 trillion more than that, so about 6.5. The high water mark was 2021, which was 6.8 or so trillion. If the House as passed version of the big beautiful bill, or reconciliation, whatever you want to call it, if that carries through the Senate, which the Senate will probably modify it, but the projection of what that will cost each year is about 6.5 trillion for the next 2 years. So we're still 2 trillion higher than the 2019 pre-pandemic levels if this version goes through Congress. So in the aggregate, a lot of the spending hasn't slowed down that much. Now inflation's hit, so it's not adjusted for inflation, but the spending is still occurring at the federal level. But what you're seeing is a lot of programmatic refocusing and shifting into other areas. One of those being defense. That area has picked up spending, if anything. And so I think as we're working with partners and working with academic institutions, it's, hey, how can we dovetail with some of those trends, particularly in the defense space? And not everybody's comfortable making bombs and missiles, and that's fine, but there's a lot of national security related, biotech being one of those areas that, when it comes to the dual use of technologies, how can we help our academic partners and our industry partners pull some of those solutions and innovations over into the defense space, where there is still pretty healthy funding levels.
Ting, anything you want to add?
We are, our funding model is a little different. Because we're industry-led, we're also philanthropy-led in a way. So our strategy is more longer term, probably more with a lot of sustainability in mind, but not less affected by a lot of the federal and state government transition that has been happening. That said, startup entrepreneurial ecosystem work, we've been really fortunate to be able to leveraging a lot of corporate donations, as well as education partner investment and philanthropic investment to help support a lot of startup founders, because we want startup founders to be successful, focus their limited resources on building their company versus getting the help from us. So that funding strategy has been working. We have been trying to diversify our funding piece, including a partnership, actually with Andrew's team, to went after a federal long-term federal contract. We won, but got pulled back. So So we're feeling the heat, but our founders have not suffered, and I think that's where, back to my comment earlier, why the public-private partnership is working so well in our community is we know we're in this together. We all play very intentional roles, and David, his team at state level has been super helpful stepping up, and we are intentional about responsible in terms of leveraging some of the state dollars to fill in the gap that we have. So we're not losing the momentum with a long-term impact in mind. And last comment, I would just also, Andrew didn't say this, but I want to say out loud for him is, the one of the primary reasons in my mind that Indiana was one of the first states that won the Tech Hubs award was because all these organizations and state level organizational knowledge and relationship and trust already there. So everybody's already somewhat clear who we brought to the table. So when the RFP came out, Andrew and team and says, hey, we're going to have to put this together. Not only we didn't compete with each other, I know a lot of sector development, including Mitch Fraser, who's sitting there, play a lot of role in terms of let's just put our heads together and aggregate into one big, beautiful proposal. And then we won. So that was really good win, and I know we got a partner in the trenches who can really execute to the milestones.
Great. Well, it's an interesting question, and I think there's a couple things at play. So as I mentioned when I first introduced myself, I firmly believe that public-private partnerships are a model of doing business, not just a way of trying to get money from the government or implement a program. I mean, there's a responsiveness, there's a mindset to understanding how the public sector collaborates with the private sector, and in our roles, for most of us, certainly in my role, that's focused on the business sector, the private sector that's driving job creation, and for my particular role, startups and small businesses. So, ultimately, we still operate under that model, regardless of whether there's prolific funding available or not so much. But I think that also drives some of the inherent activity that we want to see when resources are more limited, right? We want to see the business community, the corporate community leading the way. We want to see them pointing to the next technology. If you were around for the opening ceremony yesterday, we had a panel that included many of the business leaders of Indiana's biggest corporations. And they were talking about what they see as the future and what they need out of their government. We pay attention to that. And not just big corporate leaders, but the mom and pop shop, the dry cleaner, the tech startup, we pay attention to what they're telling us, regardless of if there's a great big pot of money down there. But I think the other piece of that is that when resources become limited, you learn to focus on what is most impactful. You learn to better measure return on investment and understand then that spending isn't just a net expense. Spending can be an investment that actually returns more in our world to the state, to the federal government, than what we put out. And then the third, it drives collaboration. And collaboration's been a key no matter how much funding was available. As it relates specifically to ARI and TechPoint both, we have existing partnerships with both of them. They're able to collaborate with the private sector in ways that we aren't. They're also able to collaborate with the public sector in ways that we aren't. 2 of the 3 tech hubs that Andrew talked about were in collaboration with Michigan and Illinois. Right? So learning how to work with coalitions of industry and university, and it's not just the governments, by the way, of Michigan and Illinois. It's University of Michigan and it's University of Illinois at the table with Indiana and their counterparts in Indiana. So I think that it drives more collaboration when we know that there may not be as much funding available from the public. But at the end of the day, public funds are our funds. Public funds are taxpayer funds. We have to ensure that we're spending those in smart, impactful ways that actually do generate good for the citizens that are providing those dollars to us. And so that can be a really healthy exercise for all of us to say, what is it that's most important? What are our corporations saying? And how can we collaborate, not just within the state of Indiana? How can we collaborate with our neighbors? How can we collaborate with other states, other universities, other governments to really drive the best outcomes for our citizens?
Well said. Good note to end on for this part of the session. So now we can open it up for questions. We've got, as you can well see, we've got very thoughtful panelists. Anybody have a question for a specific panelist or for the whole entire panel?
Hi.
Thank you.
Hello? Yeah. Okay. My question is, as you're running these public-private partnerships, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen individually in doing this public-private model?
I just want to make sure everybody heard the question. The question is, what are some of the biggest challenges when running public-private partnerships?
You guys are running them today, so I'll let you maybe address that.
You got the mic now, Tink. So.
Yeah, I can get started. The essence, what we do is stakeholder management, and that represents the both biggest an opportunity, the market buy-in, right, as well as challenges because people care different things. And just to have a case in point, I've been in my current role for 3 years now. Prior to this, I spent 16 years primarily in venture capital. So my tribe is everybody in here, right? It's all the startup founders. Now I got in my current role, all of a sudden the corporate and big businesses, and now I got a deeper understanding what an education partner wants beyond the startup innovation and tech commercialization. So aggregating all that into, to David's point, the strategy actually going to move the needle long term. When I say long term, it's not 3 to 5 years from now, but it's 5 to 10 and potentially 20 years from now, because that's what the community leaders care about. That's what our funders care about. So go sustain the long-term strategy while synthesizing and constantly bring the different stakeholders, different priorities into a coherent pathway. That's what makes this work interesting, because there's no set playbook, and also makes it challenging and stimulating on a daily, weekly, monthly, and annual basis. I'm looking at my partner, Mitch Frazier, sitting there. That's the essence what we do. Andrew?
Well, it's a great question, and I think you could probably break it down and find problems with each of the 3 words in public-private partnership. Because the public sector, as we're finding, is challenging because elections happen and policy priorities change and approaches change, and there's a tremendous amount of paperwork and bureaucracy that you have to deal with on the public side. There are different ethics rules where if you're in public service, if you're in business, you can do quid pro quos. That's what business is. You give me that, I give you this. That's bribery in the public sector, so you have to figure out how to navigate all that. And on the private side, they're understandably concerned with quarterly, earnings statements and, their bottom line. So getting them to invest time and energy and resources into the partnership can be challenging. You have to be able to consistently show them value in doing that, and that there is payoff in the end. And then the partnership, how you structure how you're going to work together, who's going to kind of have the ball on certain projects or the overall success of the project, who's ultimately going to be accountable. When you're in those partnerships, it's difficult to have the one throat to choke unless someone voluntarily, offers their throat, let's say. So all those things you have to kind of work through, but you hope in the end, back to Eric's dating analogy earlier, when my wife and I got married, she had her problems and now she had my problems, but you have somebody to work through it with, and you stick together and find a way through and find a way to keep providing value to the ecosystem.
I'd maybe just add one additional thing. I think there's an inherent challenge oftentimes with the work of entrepreneurship, innovation, small business development, and the public sector. Because I think Ting's point at the very open was a good one. We're actually talking about being 2 decades ahead or down the road, right? Like, what's the company that's starting today that 150 years from now is going to be the major employer for the state of Indiana? And that can be very hard for the public sector to think that long term. My family had a small business that we owned for over 80 years. 80 years is a long time in the public sector. There's a lot of elections that happen in the course of 80 years.
President Roosevelt liked your company.
That's right, yeah. So, I think that we try very intentionally to think longer term and to think about entrepreneurship in particular as a journey. Even if it's not that single company, right? They started, an entrepreneur goes out and they start a company, landscaping, and then they, have another company where they're now selling, landscaping equipment, and then the next company. Entrepreneurship's a journey, so we try to treat it as a long-term prospect, but oftentimes policy needs to be justified on a more immediate basis, and there's an inherent tension there, which again is where the private sector really can help push the public sector in a way that's healthy.
Some good tips there. Question over here. This probably is the last question, I suspect, but we'll see if we can get in one more.
Hi, I'm Adamola Fagade, founder in the energy space. So we deploy large-scale energy assets. I'm from Michigan. My question is just in terms of barrier to entry. Like we've noticed that different states will focus on things like serving underserved communities, workforce development, as far as if we were to extend our business to your state and whatnot. So I'm trying to understand, how do we do business with you? First of all, how do we get over like the hurdles of just sending emails or just sending pitch decks and whatnot? Like, who do we need to talk to? How do we fast track the challenges that we would have? I'm from Michigan. We have a supportive ecosystem. We're doing better. We're doing well, and we're seeing results. I've had the same situations with North Carolina and Texas, and we found different things work for different states. So this is my first time in Indiana. I would love to talk to somebody. So if you have any a direct line or a direct playbook I can follow to discuss and showcase who we are.
Well, welcome to Indiana. If you're a member of my team, could you please raise your hand so he knows who he can talk to? Okay, there's a couple. By the way, this is a good point. Whether you went and talked to Andrew, whether you went and talked to Ting, or whether you went and talked to me or any of our teams, I guarantee you we would all talk to each other. There's no wrong door, lots of side doors to get into the fun house that is Indiana. So welcome.
And you're here in a pretty darn strong ecosystem here in Indiana, so welcome. So we're really right at almost closing, so I'm going to give each of you an opportunity if you want to say one last word. We'll let Ting go first, since you haven't had a chance to go first, and then you two can fight for a second.
Thank you. Well, I would just, it's great to have almost 4,000 folks here at GEC, and potentially more with adjacent events that's happening. That's really the purpose of we're doing this, both in terms of driving long-term outcomes, but short-term output. The short-term output are driving the collisions and connections. As David mentioned, there's no run doors. The nice thing about this ecosystem, we're so tight and well wired. I think that's a sign of a healthy ecosystem, right? The healthy community where people are open-minded, people are willing to give without expecting much, at least near-term, back. And people are willing to invest not only money, but more important, time and energy and expertise. And we're all connected. We know what each other does really well. And I'm very hopeful that we're really, through this and everything else with Indiana, not only public-private partnership, but through that particular approach has been working so well, really drive a lot of startup community development here in our state in the next 20 plus years.
I'll give David the last word, but amen, Ting, and again, just thank you all for being here. I think back to the public-private partnership, what are the big challenges? I will say, not to disparage the other legs of that, but I do think the private sector engine behind it is the key to success, both on the demand side, letting the public and other sectors know what the need is in the industry, and then just continuing to provide that leadership from technical expertise and business acumen I think that's the key differentiator for a lot of these public-private partnerships. So I just encourage all of you in that entrepreneurial space, keep doing what you do, keep solving problems, and hope you do a lot of it here in Indiana too.
Well, I echo what my colleagues Ting and Andrew said. They are, sometimes it's an understated way to compliment someone, but I can tell you I've sent both of them emails where I've introduced them to other partners, entrepreneurs, startups, where I said, I'm introducing you to a good person. And they both are good people, and I mean that very, very intentionally. And I think that ultimately is how we drive success, is people who are willing to put their organization, their own ego to the side, and work for the common good. If we just relied on what government could accomplish itself, we wouldn't accomplish even 25% of what we've been able to accomplish in Indiana, because our impact is magnified 3, 4, 5 times by having the public-private partnership, by having entities like TechPoint and ARI at the table, by them bringing the higher ed, the corporate, the startup, the innovators to the table to solve a common problem. We're all pointing to the same problem, and we got to get together and solve that. If we just relied on the state, in our case, or the federal government, quite honestly, but if we just relied on the state to try to solve that problem, we'd get a less than perfect solution, and it would not have near as much impact as we're able to have by working with partners who know specific parts of the ecosystem well, who can bring different players to the table, and ultimately drive a better outcome for the citizens of the state of Indiana, in our case, and all of us, than if we tried to do it alone. And that ultimately is the goal.
So before we give this excellent panel a hand, let me just say, when I was asked to moderate this panel, I sent the email out, let's get together, blah, 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 what do we want to talk about, et cetera, et cetera. Every single one of them said, I could give the other 2 presentations for the other 2 organizations. To me, that's a sign of a strong and robust and sustainable public partnership. So let's give these guys a hand. They did a great job.